in this battle for narratives. And whenever we have narratives or facts which doesn't fit the narrative, it's simply pushed aside. So, for example, the Istanbul negotiations in the beginning of 2022 is now completely absent from the EU's war narrative because it doesn't fit with the idea that the Russians simply wanted to restore the Soviet Union or or this other narratives they're pushing. But you were actually there. You flew to Istanbul, and as the Russians and Ukrainians were negotiating, well, what is it that's missing there from the EU's narrative?
Russia's aim in 2022 with special military operation, as I interpret it, was to force Ukraine, if I could use that term, because it was under force, to return to neutrality, which would have benefited everybody, Ukraine, Russia, Europe, everybody. So it was pushing for something that made complete sense. And Ukraine as neutral would have been safe. It would have been stable. It would not have been a war zone. But the United States hates neutrality. That was the whole point of the unipolar moment. Neutrality is a violation of either you're with us or you're against us. If you claim to be neutral, you're just against us. That was the U.S. view. So what Russia's war aim was in February 2022 was neutrality in Ukraine and finally implementation of something like Minsk II, which was autonomy and protection for the ethnic Russian population. These were limited aims. They did not call for the annexation of the Donbass. That was something that came later in the year. It was not an aim in February 2022, and it was not on the table in March 2022. So we now know from so many participants, from the ones that I spoke to in Ankara, actually, the Turkish mediators, from the Russians, from the Ukrainians, from the Americans, from the Brits. We know from so many different sources that the two sides had come close to an agreement, and it was scotched by the US and UK. Johnson, Boris Johnson, was perhaps the messenger at the end that put the full kibosh to it. But the two sides were close to an agreement because Zelensky was saying publicly at the end of March 2022, all over the place in interviews, in the Financial Times, in many places, yes, Ukraine can be neutral. They were reaching an agreement. The U.S. did not want an agreement at that time. The UK, which is this is another long story, but it shows that you can have imperial nostalgia even for more than half a century or longer. The UK is a country that absurdly believes it's a world empire and acts like one, again, always counting on the US to do its bidding. The UK said, no, we need to defeat Russia to protect Western hegemony. That's actually what Boris Johnson publicly said last year. That's what the war is about. That's what you and I have been saying. That's what this is plainly the case. And so the absence of this episode from the European narrative is important, as you say, because this shows that the European narrative is completely a narrative that makes no sense. It's not true what happened. It's not true how this unfolded. You wonder, though, do they know and just absolutely refuse to tell the truth? Or don't they know? Because some of them are not very sophisticated, and maybe they believe their own narratives or whatever narrative was coming from Washington and so forth. That's a little confusing to try to understand how they can be so misguided. I have to say, though, when I went to the European Parliament, it was a side meeting. It wasn't an official meeting of the European Parliament, but people of all parties, all across the Parliament, have written to me afterwards in support. Thank you. We need diplomacy. We need a European foreign policy. The reaction has been extremely positive, except from the commission itself, but from the parliamentarians, from people across Europe, from people of all different political persuasions, by the way. This is not some extremist position, quite the contrary. People want peace in Europe. They want to return to diplomacy in Europe. It's the leadership that's not giving them that right now.
Well, it would be common sense because at the moment, the plan of the EU is seemingly to go against the world, to use money it doesn't have to buy weapons that doesn't exist, so they can defeat the world's largest nuclear power on the battlefield, which considers this to be an existential threat. So it's not really clear what the strategy is, but I
And I
guess
see that today the British are now calling for the outright confiscation of Russia's assets. Of course, it's easy for the UK to say to Europe, confiscate Russia's assets, destroy completely your creditworthiness, your position in the world of finance, your position in the world of monetary economics. That's what the British do these days. They bluster, they speak like the great imperial power, sacrificing everyone else.